Up until 1982, buying back your own company's stock was treated as a crime, market manipulation, prosecutable under federal law. Today, it runs at over $1 trillion a year. Apple alone has swallowed roughly $850 billion of its own shares, and every cent of it is perfectly legal. And guess what? The wealthy are the ones who benefit, while everyone else gets screwed over. So today, we break down the rule change that turned manipulation into a trillion-dollar habit, the money machine that hands the wealthy their gains before your wages ever move, and why the newest open door being offered to ordinary investors might be the most dangerous invitation of all. My name is Guy, and this is the Finance Bureau. Before 1982, if a company bought its own shares on the open market, it risked prosecution under Sections 9 and 10 of the Securities Exchange Act. The logic was simple enough. A company propping up its own share price is, almost by definition, manipulating the market. So companies barely did it, and buybacks at scale were effectively zero. Then, in November 1982, the SEC adopted a rule called 10b-18, which did something remarkable. It created what's called a safe harbor, which is basically a legal off-switch. Follow 4 modest conditions on timing, price, volume, and who you use to trade, and the manipulation charge simply cannot be brought against you. And once the legal risk vanished, the floodgates opened. By the 20th of August 2025, US companies had already announced $1 trillion in buybacks for the year before the year was even out. The full year figure is estimated at somewhere between $1.1 and $1.5 trillion, beating the previous record set in 2024. And it's concentrated in just a handful of names because in the second quarter of 2025 alone, just the top 20 companies accounted for 51.3% of all buyback authorizations. The aforementioned Apple is the undisputed king of this. Since launching its program in 2012, the company has repurchased around $850 billion of its own stock. In April 2026, its board waved through another $100 billion on top. Now, the official story is that buybacks reward shareholders and reflect confidence in the business. And to be fair, there's some truth in that. But confidence for whom exactly? Because a January 2026 study by Oxfam and PolicyLink tracked where buyback gains actually landed between 1996 and 2025. White households captured $9 trillion of those gains, or 91% of the total, while black households captured $104 billion. The wealthiest 10% of American households own roughly 93% of all stocks. So any rule that pumps share prices is, by construction, a rule that pumps the assets of people who are already rich. The safe harbor didn't create the inequality, it just built a trillion-dollar engine and pointed it straight at the people who needed the help least. And by the way, if you want to keep track of stories like this that affect your paycheck, portfolio, and pension, then you should check out the Finance Bureau newsletter. It's free, and in it we break down the latest in markets, monetary policy, macro, and more so that you never miss what matters most. Just click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to get started. Now, a question we need to ask at this point is where the cash comes from that inflates those share prices in the first place. Well, a lot of it traces back to central banks. You see, when a central bank runs quantitative easing, or QE, it creates new money and uses it to buy bonds from financial institutions. The banks and funds get the fresh money first. They push it into stocks, property, and corporate debt, causing asset prices to climb. And the people who already own those assets get richer pretty much automatically. And there's a name for this that's nearly 300 years old. It's called the Cantillon effect, after an Irish-French economist who worked it out back in the early 1700s. His insight was straightforward. New money never arrives everywhere all at once. Whoever touches it first gets to spend it at yesterday's prices. But by the time it trickles down to wage earners, prices have already risen. Asset prices go up, while the money in your pocket buys less. And you don't need me to tell you this is happening, because the Bank of England admitted it themselves. In 2012, the bank studied the distributional effect of its own QE program. It found that around 40% of the gains from rising asset prices went to the richest 5% of households. That's the central bank's own homework, marking its own policy. And the scale since then is pretty extraordinary. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet had ballooned to roughly $9 trillion by April 2022, up from about $4.2 trillion before the pandemic. So, the buyback machine pumps share prices and the money machine funds the pump. But once the wealthy are holding all these appreciating assets, they hit a problem, because selling to fund their lifestyles means tax. And here is where the third rule change does its work. It's a strategy critics call buy, borrow, die. Step 1, buy assets that appreciate and simply never sell them. Unrealized gains aren't taxed, so on paper you owe nothing. Step 2, borrow against those assets. A loan isn't income, so it isn't taxed either, and you fund your entire life with cheap debt secured by stock you never touch. Step 3, you die. Under a provision of the tax code called Section 1014, your heirs inherit those assets at their value on the day you died, not the price you originally paid. So imagine buying $1 million of stock that grows to $50 million. You never sell, you borrow against it, and when you pop your clogs, it passes on, and the cost basis resets to that higher figure. The $49 million of gains? Legally erased and never taxed. And this isn't a loophole just a handful of people exploit. The Joint Committee on Taxation estimates the stepped-up basis alone costs the US Treasury around $72.5 billion in a single year. Over 5 years, the bill runs to roughly $379 billion. That's money that doesn't get raised, so it has to come from someone else, namely the everyday saver taxed on every single paycheck who doesn't have a portfolio to borrow against or an estate to hand down untaxed. Two-tier, right down to the tax code. At this point, you might be thinking that at least the people writing these rules play by them too. Well, in 2025, according to a December study by Common Cause, members of Congress, their spouses and dependents made 13,324 trades to a total value of around $635 million. Now, these are the people who write the financial rules, question the CEOs, and see market-moving information before you ever will. Of the roughly 311 portfolios tracked, about 100 of them beat the S&P 500 last year. Nancy Pelosi's returned 20.1%, comfortably ahead of the market. Now, the obvious defense is that this is all disclosed, and it is under a 2012 law called the Stock Act. The problem is the enforcement. The penalty for failing to disclose a trade on time is a flat $200 fine, a figure that hasn't moved since the law passed. And the number of members ever prosecuted under the Stock Act since 2012? 0. Meanwhile, 86% of Americans, split almost evenly across both parties, want the whole thing banned. The public sees it perfectly clearly. The rules just haven't caught up, because the people who'd have to change them are the ones benefiting. But before you slam your laptop shut in disgust and hurl it across the room, there is some good news, because some of these gates are actually opening. In August 2025, an executive order directed regulators to open up private markets, private equity, private credit, and the rest to ordinary 401k retirement savers. For over 2 decades, these assets were walled off behind an accredited investor standard that kept regular people out. Now that wall is coming down, and it's being sold as democratization, access for everyone. The little guy finally invited to the top table. But why now exactly? Well, because the institutions already inside private equity are stuck. The rate at which those funds return cash to their investors just hit 11% recently, the lowest since the 2008 crisis. The industry's own reports call it a liquidity bottleneck, with big investors trapped in aging positions they can't exit. Meanwhile, a 2025 State Street survey found that 56% of institutions expect retail investors to become the dominant source of new money, precisely because the traditional buyers are tapped out. The translation of that survey is simple. The smart money needs a buyer, and the buyer they've picked is your pension. Watchdogs like Americans for Financial Reform have a blunt name for this role: exit liquidity. You become the person who buys the asset the professionals are desperate to offload. And the performance gap makes it worse because over the 3 years to mid-2025, private equity returned about 7.4% a year. A plain S&P 500 index fund returned 19.7%. Higher fees, less transparency, your money locked up for years for less than half the return of a fund you could buy this afternoon. So, the door is now open, just not for your benefit. If you hold a workplace pension, this is already your problem because you didn't choose any of it. The buyback that inflates a stock you own through an index fund, the QE that pumped asset prices while your wages lagged, and the private equity being funneled into retirement plans, none of it was voted for by ordinary citizens. And when you eventually try to sell or refinance or retire, you meet the full price of debt and tax that the people who wrote these rules have engineered their way around entirely. They hold the appreciating assets, and you're left with the bill. The good news, though, is that now that this door has been opened, we can see what's been going on inside. And that means it is possible for ordinary people to start pushing back against a system that is very much rigged against them. But what do you think? Is opening private markets to ordinary savers a real chance for the little guy to finally share in the gains? Or is it just the smart money handing you the bag on its way out the door? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. That's all from me for today, though, so as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Guy, signing off.